Hey everybody, this is Les Stroud. Yes, I know, aka Survivor Man. And you're listening to Brian on Sasquatch Odyssey.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Sasquatch Odyssey. Thank you so much for being with us for the show. It is Wednesday. I hope you guys have had a great week. We have an amazing guest lined up for you, but as always, I want to start by inviting you. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. You can get me at brian@paranormalworldproductions.com. You can head over to the website, check it out, become a member there, and help support the show. As I said, we've got a great guest lined up on the show. I got to sit down and talk to Jenny from New York. She had some really interesting experiences in the Uinta Mountains, and I'll let her tell you all about that in just a second. Danny and I just got back from our trip to South Carolina. We were up there for about 4 days. We did the South Carolina Bigfoot Festival in Westminster, South Carolina, and we had a blast meeting all of you guys who stopped by to say hello. So thanks for all of you who came by and said hello and showed us some support by picking up some merch. We had a great weekend, and we're definitely looking forward to going back there next year. I have received tons of messages, tons of emails from all of you guys who are interested in what happened during my trip to Radium and going out on expedition with Todd Standing. I am working on putting that together. Danny is going to come up with some sort of a schedule. We're going to post that over on social media to let you guys know when we're going to filter this stuff out over the next couple of months. I am working on putting out at least some of that audio from some of our campfire discussions with Todd and I sitting around the fire up at base camp there in Radium. I will probably have that out here for you guys on Friday. Wayne and I are going to sit down and record an episode of That Bigfoot Podcast, and we're going to put out that interview on Friday on That Bigfoot Podcast. It's going to be all about my time up there at Radium, some of the things that I experienced, and we'll get into all of that on That Bigfoot Podcast. We will do a live show at some point in time coming up here on Sasquatch Odyssey. So if you have questions about the expedition, send them to us via email, brian@paranormalworldproductions.com. We'd love to get those questions on the show and get them answered for you as soon as we put that together. Make sure you stick around to the end of this interview because in addition to her interesting experiences out in the bush, Jenny is also a biologist and a geneticist. And we get into the Bigfoot DNA question towards the end of the interview. She has some really cool perspectives on that because she works with DNA every single day. Make sure you stick around for that. But enough of that, and I'm going to stop talking. You guys sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It is Jenny from New York. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Hi, it's nice to meet you.
It's great to meet you. I'm so glad that you're here. I was so glad that you reached out to us on our website using the leave us a voicemail button. Very few people ever take advantage of that, so I'm always excited when I get those. So how was that process for you when you went to the website? Was it easy to use? Did you enjoy the process?
It was very easy to use, and I actually really loved leaving the voicemail. It was nice being able to record what I had to say and play it back and make sure I was leaving a thoughtful message, and I really enjoyed that. It felt very personable, so thank you.
Yeah, I definitely love the personal touch to it because I usually respond to those with my own voice. Sometimes I'm not able to, and we have to email people, but it automatically sends us your email when you do the voicemail so we can get with you either way. So I appreciate you using that. But in that, you said a lot of things in that 5 minutes. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about Sasquatch. Let's talk about Bigfoot. Let's start with the obvious question. What got you interested in the subject to begin with?
I think, like most of your listeners, I thought there was one Bigfoot in like California. And that's the way I just thought of it as a kid. And like it never occurred to me that they would be on the East Coast or not even in Ohio. So I grew up in Ohio and never had a fear of going in the woods. My parents were free-range parents. They allowed me to play in the woods and build forts and do all that child of the 80s kind of thing. And then we took trips out west and I fell in love with being out west. And I think maybe that's where I started thinking about it. Just, we're going out west. Maybe we'll see Bigfoot. I didn't necessarily think of this as Bigfoot, but it like opened my mind up that there's things in the woods that I don't understand. When I was 13, I grew up in those years in Connecticut in a forest. And I was looking out my window one night and I got this overwhelming nausea, like sick feeling, and this incredible pull to go outside. It was very weird. So I did. I was like, oh, I got to go outside to make this feeling go away. And when I did, I saw these swoops of light in the trees. It was so bizarre. It was almost like somebody was shining a spotlight in the trees. They were swooping around. And I ran inside. I watched it for like minutes. I ran inside. I couldn't get my parents or their guests to come out. They just thought they're like, oh, you're whatever. So I went and got my sister. And my sister came out with me and it scared her really bad. And I saw swoops of light in the trees. She saw orbs, but neither of us had the orb word at that time. So it was years later that she told me that she saw the orbs. And that was the first time I learned that two people could see the same thing and have a different memory and interpretation of it. That there was something in the woods, in the trees that I didn't understand. I didn't know what it was. But I never lost my fear of the forest. I just was like, what is this weirdness? And so when I moved out west to do snowboarding and be a ski bum, basically, in my 20s, and eventually a wilderness guide, you joked around, right? You joked around. And anybody like I was able to have an in-depth conversation with in like Oregon, I'd be like, oh, we're in Bigfoot land. Do you have any stories? And then people would tell me stories. And so I was like, whoa, this isn't just one thing in California, but you still never think you're going to have an encounter. Or I never thought I'd have an encounter. I just thought, oh, that's weird. So that's the background. I think like most people, you're like, is it real? Is it not real? Enough people tell you it is. It doesn't hit home. So I was living on Mount Hood, and that's a whole backstory, but I was ski bum on Mount Hood and I blew my knee and I needed to build my knee up fast. So I thought I'm going to go backpacking. And this was my first solo multi-day backpacking excursion. And keep in mind, I had no language for what I experienced. I was crossing the area around Alpine Meadows and I heard heavy footsteps running at me. And it was like, doom, it shook the ground. And I was crossing behind these huge trees. And my first thought was like, I'm going to get run down by a giant elk or moose or something. And I ducked behind the tree, but I was excited to see what was running by because I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a firsthand encounter with a moose or something. And I felt the whoosh on my face, but there was nothing. I only like felt and heard the footsteps, but there was nothing. And it freaked me out. But it was dark. It wasn't dark, so dark I had a headlamp on, but I was like, I got to get to my sleeping spot. I had a blown knee. I'm using a crutch or like a ski boundary pole as a cane, and I had duct tape on my knee. I was like, I can't run. I can't go anywhere but forward. And even though I felt like an intense feeling of being watched, I went on. I spent that night just wrapped in a tarp on a knoll that I thought, oh, if there's a mountain lion, nothing can get me here. Like it was a place that nothing could like pounce on me. I did not sleep last night. I was sure I was going to be eaten. I had nothing else to do but keep hiking. So anyways, of course, when I got back and I was working at Timberline and I talked with Ski Patrol and was like, oh, the craziest thing happened. And I told them, and they gave me you were at the snow line. There's no elk grazing in the snow fields. And it's never sunk in what they were talking about. But they know what it was. They had been laughing so hard when I left the shack. And this is, we talked a little bit before. this is where like some of these realities are like in my face, but I don't recognize them. So anyways, when I eventually moved to Utah and became a wilderness guide, this was summer, is there summer 99 or summer 2000? I had no fear of the forest. I had no concerns there was anything in the forest besides bears. Although I had come across a book called Big Footprints at the local Sandy, Utah library. And that gave me the bug of, oh, they might not be here, but there's so many track events in Indiana and Ohio. And I would talk with the other staff about it. Oh, have you had any experiences? Do you know anything about it? And so now we're going to like dive into, this is like the setting of this experience. A new friend that I had met during the training of the program, he told an incredible encounter story around the campfire. And like hearing that and paired with the big footprint story and with my own experience in Oregon, I was like, oh, this is like really a thing. And I was like, I want an experience. So I went to this person and was like, obviously you have experiences. I want to have one. Let's do this. And he's, no, you don't want this experience. So one of the reasons why I wanted to come on your podcast today is because these wilderness guides, they have, not these, but I'm sure that there are wilderness guides out there that have experiences. And this is just a sidebar, but we're all very protective of our programs that we work at. And we don't want anybody to not get out in the wilderness, even though we have some unusual encounters. But this is a person who had a very intense encounter that I think we all believe, to be short about it. And I'm sure there's more out there. And so I would encourage any other guides that have heard the story of this person told around the campfire and now hear me tell it. I hope it gives you the confidence to also come forward with your stories. So anyways, carrying on, me and the staff, we decided to go hiking in the Uintas. And I was new to orienteering. And so the goal was to orienteer and go off trail and do some drawing and just have a 3 or 4 day backpacking trip in literally deep wilderness. There was still snow up in the mountains, so we felt like we could get water and do our survival thing. Anyways, I don't want to tell too much about the location because I feel like I could have been killed up there and I wasn't. And so in some ways, I owe it to the beings that didn't kill me, not to tell exactly where they were. But I will say that if we were standing on the ridge that we crossed, and this is in the Uinta Mountains, we could see Skinwalker Ranch. And so we're on that basin side, and we were working out of Duchesne. And I will say that it was near a very large reservoir. And if I recall, one of the reasons why we picked it is because one of our trainers had stories of people seeing Sasquatches walk across the lake during the dam construction. So we thought, Jenny wants an experience. This is going to be the place to go. So anyways, we were equipped for backcountry backpacking, left out of a campground. And sometime into it, after a few stops, we were approaching the top of a little ridge. And we heard what sounded like a baby animal. It was like, but it was that kind of, not a screech, not a yell, just sounded just like a baby animal, maybe calling for its mother. It didn't sound like a bear, but I would say the closest thing to it would be a bear. And so I think we looked at each other and we're like, oh, we can sneak up on a bear, because the sound was coming from across almost like a slot wash. Like the wash was so deep that we were safe, whatever was on the other side. And so we ditched our packs and I think we did crawl like elbows and scooched behind some rocks. I had binoculars and we're peeking up over this rock and expecting to see a bear. We saw nothing, but this is where I think I hope he calls in and tells his story someday. But what I saw was sagebrush moving, tree branches moving, but I couldn't see anything that was making the plants move, which is a really disturbing thing. Okay, so then you go through your head like, what would be smaller than the sagebrush but be able to move the sagebrush? So I bring out my binoculars, and all I'm seeing is sagebrush moving, and it's moving like up the mountainside so fast. Like, if you maybe as fast as, say, deer running up, like that kind of speed where you'd see like brush move up higher up, but there was nothing there. And so I believe I was looking through the binoculars for like maybe 4 or 5 seconds. Maybe I even passed it to him. But then all of a sudden we heard this. I'll just tell you what my interpretation is. It sounded like a giant rock. If a human picked up a rock the span of their arms and banged it against a huge stump, and it went like boom. The shock and terror that went through me was like nothing I'd felt, maybe since I had been camping up on Mount Hood. But it was like, I don't know what that is. And we were like, could that be like a moose banging its antlers? Could it be a rock falling down? We were like, I heard that bang come from the same position 3 times. And we went back and forth. And we're like, could not come up with a reasonable explanation. It was like, that was freaky. We're getting out of here. And so we hustled back up to our packs, put our packs on, continued hiking. Sometime later down the trail, he looks at me and he goes, run. I'm like, what? I see something, run. And I'm like, what do you see? And I think he said a moose, because we had a little bit of a discussion about where to run to. And we decided to run out to the middle of a creek with a lot of like rocks that would be difficult for a moose to get its footing on. So we ran out to the middle of this creek, and I never saw why he said run, but he looked shook to me. And I thought he said he saw something big and black, which in the Uintas, one would think that's a moose. But I didn't see a moose. We never saw a moose. And one would think a charging bull moose would make itself known. So now I'm thinking this guy is playing some elaborate joke on me. I don't know him super well, but he's a really good person. But during our planning to meet up here or do on this trip, his dad told us a story about seeing some Sasquatch in a field when he was a kid. So I thought, they've been setting me up since the beginning. Okay, so he said he sees something. He's just saying that to get me to run and get me like shook up. So now we're off trail and we got to orienteer to back to the trail. So we do that. And I'm telling myself, he's just playing a joke on me. I don't know how. It's got to be a joke. So in this particular program, we don't set up tents. We just go out with like minimal. And so we had a tarp, and we set up a tarp and like an A-frame kind of tarp, but it's open, it's big, and it's open to the air. And we don't exactly find the trail, but we're close to where we think it is. And we set up in what we discussed was like the safest place we could find. If that was a moose, we crossed the canyon area. And anyways, I felt safe. I could not sleep that night. It was awful. I kept feeling like I was being watched and listened to. But at this time, remember, I think like maybe he's playing a joke on me. So I'm keeping this to myself. Like, I don't want to give him any more fuel to the fire kind of thing. And also, like I said, he's a great person. We're just having a nice time cooking, eating, whatever. And I should note that we are like avid bear bag hangers, right? So that was another thing we discussed, is like making sure anything with a smell is far away from us, especially since we had just had those prior experiences. And so I will say, I'll just jump ahead, is after this whole adventure, he did tell me that after I told him I couldn't sleep this particular night, he said, I did hear something sit down next to our tent.
Stay tuned for more Sasquatch Odyssey. We'll be right back after these messages.
And I want to say he said it was like a sack of potatoes, but he said it was like something big sat down next and he could hear it breathing. And he imitated it like that. And then again, I'm like, boy, if this is a joke he's playing on me, he's really doing it well. I hadn't listened to Bigfoot podcasts. The only book I'd ever read was Bigfoot Prince. I'm still just maybe a big guy is messing with us. We're in the wilderness, but that is like all I could think of. So we woke up in the morning and there was a guy on horseback, like looking down on us. We had made it to the trail, just hadn't realized it. So we continue on and we get up to this beautiful lake and no incidences, except for I did actually hear a mountain lion cub. It's what it sounded like. So that was pretty cool. Didn't sound anything like the thing I'd heard earlier the day before. I was like, oh, that was neat. Anyways, so even though we hadn't had any incident up to that day, we were still concerned. I say we, because I know there was a discussion that maybe somebody was trying to mess with us. So for this next night, we were going to hike all the way into the snow. And we were going to stay so high up and so surrounded by snow that nobody could sneak up on us. And we went off trail so nobody could just follow the usual trail. No pranksters, no, like a guy on horseback came riding by in the morning. Nobody that just rode up there with horses and was messing with the backpackers. So if anybody here wants to Google the Uintas, Google Earth it, these ridges are they're giant piles of rocks the size of Volkswagens. It's eroded out of the mountain. Saying it's a scree slope, it does not do it justice. It was bouldering. So we'd boulder from over one rock to the next. And we just did orienteering, just said where we were going and went. So we climbed over these boulders for the whole rest of the evening. And then to get down the other side, it's sliding on your butt because you don't want to take a chance of falling. It's sliding on your butt, hand over feet. You get the picture. It was strenuous. And below us was this beautiful lake. I think it might have been a twin lake. It was still iced over. Everything had snow, but there were rocks poking out. So you could walk on the rocks, not worry about your feet pulling through between the rocks. And trees were only 8 feet tall. They were short trees, enough that we were concerned about hanging our bear rope. But we were so inconvenient for any animal that's trying to survive out there that the bears weren't a concern. We had picked a spot where we felt safe. And so we set up camp, hung the bear ropes as far from camp as we could and as high as we could, took out anything smelly just per regular bear protocol. And so we set up our tarp and I'm sure we cooked. I don't think the fire ban was in yet. So I think we had a little fire. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, same thing. Set up the tarp. It's open and went to bed. And I think we were chit-chatting and then you fall asleep. And in that weird space of not quite asleep yet, we hear the rocks that we just bouldered over on the ridge grinding against each other. It was like nothing my mind could comprehend except for a landslide. It wasn't the sound of landslide. It was one single rock grinding on the rocks beneath it, and then a pause, and then another one grinding beneath it. I heard it coming, approaching the ridge, and then coming down the ridge toward us. And I know at that point we both got up and we're like, what the heck? But we're surrounded by snow. And so it's whatever it is, we'd hear it on the snow. We'd hear the snow crunching. And there was no snow crunching. So we got, back to sleep. It was freezing. We were tucked into our sleeping bags. And then all of a sudden, like I am almost asleep. Whack! Something hit the side of our tarp and it sounded like a big stick. Again, weird because we didn't hear any sticks break. And where we're at, all the sticks are buried under snow. The only sticks are branches that are growing on the tree. It's alpine. Things don't just hang around dead. So I was like, that's weird. I was like, that came from the side. It was the side of the tarp. Maybe a stick though. Okay. And we hadn't heard any snow crunching. So went back to sleep. As soon as I'm like almost asleep, whack, again on the side of the tarp. Now it's messed up. Now it's like too much of a coincidence. And we get up, we shine lights around, see nothing. We yell, get out of here. Get out of here, bear. I don't know. It's mind boggling. But obviously something's there. Can't find anything. We decide the best course is, I'm trying to think if we had a fire, there was not much wood. So we may have got the fire going again. And then it's very little though. I don't know. Not going to intimidate much. And we're big leave no trace people. So it wouldn't have been anything big. But forgot to say this. It happened again with the stick smack. And we pull the backpacks into the tarp. I think we originally had the backpacks sitting away from us in case any lingering smells were on them. But I think under these circumstances, we had pulled them under. And this is 3-4 times into the stick smack. I'm sleeping and I've got a backpack, probably mine, under my head as a pillow, the top part. And I feel it slide a little bit from under my head. And I wake up. I'm like, get up. And we got our knives out. So he had this amazing knife called a kukri knife. And I had this giant knife, had saw blades on it. Now, all right, somebody's messing with us and they're trying to steal our backpack. Or there's a bear trying to get our backpacks. So we wrap the packs at tarp. And now we're both in our sleeping bags with the knives with us. And I don't know how he did it, but I heard him snoring. It's like, how is he snoring? I'm terrified. And I don't know what to do except try to stay warm and ready. And I've got my head on the pack with the packs wrapped in the tarp. And I feel like somebody is standing over my head. It is such an unsettling sensation. It felt like a huge man was standing over me. And I am trying to hold my breath. Okay, if he thinks I'm sleeping and he unzips my sleeping bag, I can fight and it'll be a surprise. But then I feel the backpack and the tarps and I hear the tarp. It's sliding out from under my head. And I'm like, that mother chucker is trying to steal my pack. And we're 3 days in. And I'm like running through my head. Is it safer to fight or let him get the pack? I'm presuming he's got our food already. Our water bottles are in there. It's freezing. We're at snow line. Like my boots, my coat, my jacket. Anyway. So I make the decision to jump out of my sleeping bag and I yell this person's name. I was like, wake up, he's stealing our packs. And we both get up with our knives and start screaming, nothing there. There's nothing there. That there was like some like drag mark or some slidey mark, something in the dirt, but like not a footprint or anything. Also, it was snow. So I think we like used our boots to shush away snow like around our fire, but there was not much. Like I expected to see boot prints or animal prints or something. There was nothing. So now this has been going on for quite a while because whatever it is waits until like we're just about asleep and then it whacks. And so now we're up and I'm like, how are you sleeping? And then something happens to me that now I have a word for it, but I didn't then. I felt like I have to go to the bathroom right now. And I felt nauseous, not nauseous like I haven't drank enough water. Like something is wrong. And I could not wait. And this saint of a human being stood by me with his giant knife so I could use the wilderness facilities, thinking that I was going to die in like the worst, most comforting position ever with this person that I respected. And it's going to be the story of whatever. But whatever, it was what it was. And so now I'm like, I'm having that nauseous feeling like I had when I was a kid. I'm also wondering if the fear is taking over my body, but I feel fight, flight, or fright. I'm feeling like fighting, got the adrenaline pumping. I'm thinking somebody's trying to kill us out here. And they could very well get away with it. So I think we tried. I'm a little fuzzy on what happened. I think something happened where we were like, we have some hard decisions to make at this point. Can we hike out? Can we leave right now? The answers were always no. It was dangerous to hike out in the dark, in the Uintas, through boulder fields and snow that you could break through the snow and get your ankle between the rocks. Did we have something pursuing us? Did we have somebody messing with us? Whatever it was moving, those giant boulders, is it more than one person? So I think we must have had another stick hit the thing, or maybe he heard something. I think there was something like a stick break, like sounded like somebody stepped on a stick, but something happened where I think he looked at me and do you have any ideas? And I said, I only have one last thing, and that's to pray. I will front load that I have done this in multiple times in not this same scenario, but scenarios where I think I may have been dealing with these, whatever this was. And I'm still here to tell the tale. So what I did, and I know this is going to sound wild, but I just said, we've got to pray. And I said, I ask a ring of angels to surround our camp and protect us and not let anything bad cross our camp. And I asked for a protection of a ring of angels. And then I asked for protection for us to get safely back to our car. And then I said, in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. And the moment I said, Jesus Christ, we heard, and well, I'll say I heard, that's when I heard the movement on the snow. But they were far apart. It was like snow crunch, or maybe like a stick break. And then far from that, another sound. And then I heard the snap and pop on that frozen lake of something crossing the lake that was heavy enough to snap and pop the ice, but not break through. And I was waiting for the break. I was like, how is something crossing that lake without breaking through? But the snap and the pop, and you know the sound, but it was like, these lakes were big. I don't know how many 100 steps I would have to take to get across it, but it was not a shot. We only heard like a limited number of pops. I would just say 4 or 5. That was also mind blowing. What the heck? And then I heard the grinding of those giant boulders against each other going up and over the ridge, but they went over a different ridge. So like the first time we heard it, it was following our path exactly. When we heard it coming in. So it was like something somehow following our smell across the rocks. But this went over the different ridge. It was heading west, heading towards Salt Lake. So yeah, that was also weird. Okay, why would an animal take all that energy to come all the way up here and then not go back to whatever its like territory is? And also, what animal throws sticks on the side, like side-handed? At this point, the sun was starting to come up. And it was like 4 a.m, something like that. And we immediately looked for tracks, found nothing. Looked for the sticks that were hitting the tarp, couldn't even find the sticks that were hitting the tarp. that was weird. We packed up and got the heck out of there, and no incidents all the way back. And I will say that I should say, like, in case someone's, oh, did you talk about this later? We didn't. It's like classic encounter. Like, it never occurred to me to talk about it later. But I thought, I was also embarrassed. I was like, he just played the prank of all pranks on me. That's the alternative, right? So either there's something out there that is so big and scary, or I had the prank of all pranks played on me. This person, we were very good friends. And then I would say, like, I screwed up the friendship. I'd been through a lot of, just like sidebar in this, I've been through like a lot of trauma with my family and childhood, things that I did not even was fully aware of until the pandemic hit. And then after the pandemic and a lot of different like memories and things like that came up, it was like a fog lifting. But regardless, I just want to say, in case this person is listening, thank you for being a great friend to me. I just was a mess. I just was not a good friend back to him. And so I say this because I heard the story told back to me from other people. So I stopped telling it around the campfire because I didn't want people to think that this was a story that we had cooked up and was telling people. Also, I really want to respect his privacy, because that was the problem. Like, back then, I was such an open book and with my emotions, and I had poor boundaries and I had all this trauma. So really good friendships, I was not the best at. I wish I could discuss this event with this person, but the last time I ran into him, he was still camping up in those Uinta Mountains. He was heading up there hunting. This is just like a sidebar. I get metal poisoning really easy, and it makes me just like stutter and makes all my thoughts run forward. And at that time, I was working in the oil fields, living out there by Skinwalker Ranch in Roosevelt, Utah. It was in that moment. So in my brain, I'm like, I really want to talk about this thing, but I'm just not communicating great. And I'm just falling into that. Here's a person I really respect, and I can't get my thoughts out. But during that pause, I also mentioned that I didn't have any issues in that area with unusual beings for years. So I wouldn't want anybody to not go into the wilderness because of that. It was a very weird experience that did not happen again for a very long time. After this experience, we literally left the campground, like where we had the car parked, drove to work, and went out, worked in the wilderness 8 more days. I had to work in that same field area for years. And so I just had to like take this experience and shove it to the back. So when I would hear it told back to me, I think the way I did it was like, maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was like, honestly, if somebody was like, what do you think it was? I was like, aliens? Because I knew nothing about the Bigfoot lore. I didn't know they could be giant. I don't know. I just didn't know. I had no idea what had happened. I had an idea, but I couldn't put money on it. I started talking about this. So years go by, and I worked in different places. I worked for Outward Bound for a little bit in Florida, worked in Georgia, different places in Utah. In this period of time, I was working in Georgia. I was working in a girls group, and it was a new program for this particular area. This is in North Georgia, Rabun County. And I don't want to be too specific because I don't want anybody to be concerned about this field area. They do amazing work, but I have seen occasional, I think there's some sightings up on BFRO, but like, it was not in my brain that there was ever a primate in the forest of the East Coast. Like, it was not in my brain. So when one of my students comes running back from the latrine, and the latrine is like, this is wilderness, leave no trace. So it's a dug hole that we all share, and it's put in a private place. And put them near big logs because so you could lean, you could have a hand on the log. So it's a newish program at this point, and it's a camp we'd never camped at, and it was restock. So we had a food drop. Oh, that reminds me. That experience over in the Uintas, our food wasn't touched. So like any thought that this was an animal, that would be weird, right? Like, why was our food never touched?
Stay tuned for more Sasquatch Odyssey. We'll be right back after these messages.
So we're at this camp, and at the time, I had this incredible dog, and I'm about to give away who I am for people in the wilderness industry. I had an amazing search dog named Duncan. So one of the roles I had at this program was to go and find any runaways or kids that were in like a mental crisis, things like that, cutting. I had this incredible dog that I'd gotten in Utah. His name was Duncan. He's Duncan the Wonder Dog. He just was incredible. You could trust what this dog cued for. And so when this student came running back to camp saying there is a man with a red light on his head watching her from behind the log, I got my dog and we immediately went there, and I'm sure I grabbed something that was a weapon, something to be used as a weapon. My other staffer came with me. We got the search dog. We're like, we're going to find this guy. We're getting him. Because it was a girl going to the bathroom. We're just like, predator. Also, a restock. We're like, if somebody's messing with us, we have all our food dropped here. So we were ready to catch this guy. We're like, okay, tracked to the log. The dog went like, signaled like immediately, sniffed all around it, and then Duncan bolted. But with his nose to the ground, he was following a trail, and the ground was like packed down behind the log. And he goes across a little creek, out to the road, across the road. Now, this is the weird part. Are you from Georgia?
Yes, I know
Right?
exactly where Rayburn
Okay.
County is.
Okay. You know how you get those dirt roads that are built into the side of the mountain and it drops off? This was a spot where there was a creek running through, and it was almost like a little floodplain, and there was trees, and you could tell people probably used it for hunting. But the hillside, we couldn't hike overland to this site. We had to come out to the road in a different spot and then come down to the road to the drop. And so my dog was trying to pull us up the side of the hill, going up the other side. And I was like, let's go get him. You know, like we're in our 20s, we're fit, we have a clear scent, and we're just like a minute behind. But when I'm looking at the hillside, I'm thinking the only way I can get up this hillside is pulling myself up by the trees. Now I'm asking myself, how did a human being do that? How is this possible? And why did they come to our camp with a headlamp on? That makes no sense. If you're trying to be sneaky, why would you come with a headlamp on? So we went back to the camp and we're like, you sure you saw a red light? Oh, yeah. I saw a red light come up from behind the log, and I pulled my pants up and came running back to camp. And this is where I was like, there was an explanation, which I had thought was the explanation until only just 2 years ago. I started listening to podcasts and learned about the red light in the eyes. I think he bombed abortion clinics or something, and he was living up in those hills. And when he was caught up in Asheville, I think it was, he had some of the camping gear from one of our coworkers that was stolen out of her garage. But what always bugged me was he doesn't want to get caught. Why would he come to our camp with a headlamp on? And we had a 100-pound German Shepherd. And so that maybe he wanted the food, but our food wasn't messed with. So that was always niggling in the back of my head, is that made no sense. Then another time that was very weird was, again, I was working with the girls group. This was like considerably later, because we really had to work hard to find a new camp that we'd never been in, but we found one. And one of my students was out hanging a bear rope, and she comes running back to camp and she says, GI, that was my wilderness name. She said, GI, there's a man watching me from the bushes. And now I'm like, oh, I'm thinking it's maybe one of the hill people because every now and then we see one of the hill people. I'm thinking one of the hill people are coming, like spying on my girls, and I'm putting an end to that. So get the dog. I was like, take me where you went. And yeah, it was rhododendron, which they're big down there, down the creek bottoms. And immediately my dog gives me the signal that there was a person there, not an animal, a person. But the weirdest thing is the signal went up the tree. I don't remember what kind of tree, but a tree that could be climbed. And my dog was very adamant. And he kept looking up into the canopy. That always really bugged me. And it was so disconcerting that the hill people can climb trees and sneak up into our camp? That makes no sense. So we all slept together in a line. Like I brought the kids all together that night. So they basically wanted every kid to feel like the dog could protect them. And we didn't have any incident, but those are two things that always really bugged me. And I wanted to share that in case one of those students or even one of the staffers at the time happened to hear this, or somebody else could have had an experience up there that shared it or corroborated or what have you, get another perspective. I will say that's about the end of what had happened while working at Wilderness. When we were preparing for this, I would keep remembering things and I made a list. So I'm just looking down to make sure I didn't miss anything that was important. I made this one little note in here. I'm going to say it because I heard it mentioned on, like, maybe even this podcast, but I'll just make a note about the Skinwalker Ranch thing. I lived in the basin for many years. There was the years where I worked out of Duchesne, where I was doing the backpacking there. But jumping forward in time, I went to college and I became a biologist. And my first job out of college was a chemist. But then I wanted to make more money and go on adventures. And I was looking for jobs in the basin. And I started working in the oil fields. And one of my coworkers from the Wilderness program, I lived with her, lived in the basin. And I want to talk a moment about Indian Canyon. And this probably for another podcast, another discussion. But I think the proximity to like the first big incident, it could be significant. But it wasn't the only weird thing that happened to me in the basin, specifically Indian Canyon. And I have seen or heard some different podcasts mention the Indian Canyon area and that canyon that goes past Aventaquin down to Price. And there's a coal mine out there. That really is a creepy area. And there's all kinds of stories from the oil field workers in that area. And when we came down the night from that in Uintas, we needed to find like a place to sleep that night before we had to be at work in the morning. We could only get a few hours sleep. So we drove down Indian Canyon and just found a spot that was National Forest land and just rolled out the sleeping bags. But that night I had the same feeling, not quite as intense as I had up in the Uintas. And I could not shake it. And I just kept telling myself, these things are everywhere. We had an experience up in the Uintas. How could there possibly be one over here in Indian Canyon? I don't see how that's possible. It's got to be my nerve. But I could not shake it. Like I kept getting up with my headlamp and looking around because I thought maybe the owners of the closest house had come and walked up to us. Why are these people camped on the side of the road? But now after I keep hearing the stories of Indian Canyon, so I just wanted to put that out there. Indian Canyon's a thing. The Uinta Basin, Skinwalker Ranch. People have so many stories in that region. Like I said, that could be something for another time, but it's a thing. I have some experiences. The basin, it's an unusual place. Do you have a moment for me to share, at least with you, about the DNA thing? Because I was thinking today at work, if there was one thing I could share about the DNA that I think people need to know about, and it might change how they approach the DNA. Do you have a minute?
Sure.
First of all, I want to give respect to the Matt Pruitt book. I haven't read his book yet, but I think he talks a little bit about the science. I want to give some respect to that. I haven't read it yet. But I do think that this one I'm about to tell you is additive. Okay, so I'm a geneticist. I work with DNA all day long, and I specifically work for a bioscience company. So my experience is in like the private end of things. When I have tried to play a few podcasts, like Sasquatch podcasts, laughter ensues. You hear people be like, that's not possible when people talk about DNA. It's because to be able to detect what you're looking for, you have to be able to measure it. You have to have so much DNA, millions of copies of a section of DNA to be able to get a good reading. Now, I'm sure there's instrumentation out there that can detect very small amounts, but you're talking like enormous costs, enormous time. And I can give you a little bit of a cost breakdown, but like we just got a new sequencer. I don't know how many millions of dollars it is, but it might even just be like 700,000. The cost of these sequencers is coming down like lower and lower, but the technology is always changing. But you need so many terabytes. You have to have a high powered computer. So now you're talking like the cost of the computer, the cost of the storage, the cost of the sequencer. But you can get all that together. And if you don't know what your primer is, you're dead in the water. You have DNA and you want to replicate a stretch of it. You have to know where to begin on that strand of DNA to replicate it. Your primer is a mixture of a couple different aspects of that strand of DNA. But if you think about it, you've got to have a place to start. You don't know where to start. You just get a big jumble of C's, G's, T's, and A's. And those primers are found by running something through like a sequencer. And there's other ways to do it. But essentially, when people send their DNA away to a lab, that lab is using primers that they already have a known species for. So I feel like people are wasting their money and they're getting their hopes up. And if somebody sent our lab a DNA sequence, we can only test for the things that are known. And even if you had things that are unknown, if we're like, oh, that's weird, we get a whole lot of this sequence of DNA showing up. We see it as a band. We're like, oh, we're getting a bunch of bands. Don't know what these bands are. You've got a few people that are hired to figure that out. You have to try different like cocktails of primers and mixes and nucleotides called optimization. It's like a whole process that costs money. And so the QA department or whoever's in charge of getting rid of things that don't make sense is just going to be like, oh, this is junk. We can't put our name behind junk. Follow what I'm saying? So the hope to cut through the QA issues, cut through the primer issues, is you need somebody like an Elon Musk to come in who gets the sequencing equipment, pays however many texts they need to review. And then even after you do all that and you can focus on your sequence of DNA that is, quote, unknown, you still don't know what it does because in between known sections of sequence are random bits of DNA put there by viruses or artifacts of the replication process. So how do you prove that's an organism? It could just be viral DNA. It's so disputable. This is why I'm like, oh, people are spending money on something that we already know what the result's going to come back as. I have some other aspects of what people could do to help focus their attention and their money and get the attention of somebody that might invest. And I want to respect your time.
Sure.
You know,
and I'll say this, and I've said it before on the show about DNA. With the Melba Ketchum DNA study, the lady that I interviewed, her show dropped today. She sprung it on me 40 minutes in that she played an integral part in setting up some of that DNA stuff for Melba Ketchum. And I'm like, holy shit, I had no idea you were involved. But here's the thing that's always bothered me. And I know Darby Orcutt from right here at UNC.
I heard that. It sounds wonderful.
Here's the thing that has always stuck out to me. I'm clearly not a scientist. I don't know anything about DNA, but the limited knowledge that I have, I've always thought that in order for DNA to play out in any way when you're looking at Bigfoot or Dogman or whatever you're talking about, there has to be a known primer. There has to be something to compare it to at the end of the day. People are saying, no, there's these new technologies or there's this new stuff. And I saw him up in the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot conference back in July. And I told him I wanted to get him on the show. But that's a question I want to ask him, because otherwise, if that's not the case, if you can't take a small amount of DNA and then somehow they can extrapolate and go down the sequence and figure out what it is without having a known primer, it seems like a waste of time for me. So it's a rabbit hole that I'm definitely willing to go down with people. I want to understand it because it is something. You say DNA and Bigfoot and they're going to do this study, and now Melba Ketchum's retesting stuff and she's doing her thing. I think all that's fantastic, but if you're just throwing money down a rabbit hole, I think there's different ways and better ways to go about it.
Yeah. Everybody wants to be a special chicken. Have you ever seen a chicken in a chicken coop? There's like always one that's, oh, look how cool am I? I'm not trying to get my foot into the Bigfoot community. Does that make sense?
Sure.
But I do think that it is unusual that somebody with my background chooses a job where if people knew some of my experiences, they would just be like, you can't work here. You're crazy. Like, you believe in things that don't exist. But the scientist in me does want to make sure I am clear that, because I want to make sure Darby Orcutt's supported, a sequencer can sequence DNA without knowing what it is. Then you take that sequence and you compare it to other sequences. So what Darby would be able to do is say, these things don't match anything else. But because of the conservation of the code across different organisms, we share so much DNA with other organisms. You've got to narrow in on a part of the code that contains uniqueness. And that, I think, will be their challenge. Yes, it's possible. And this is what I meant by you got to get enough people on the job. And a private company does not pay people to do unknowns.
I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you.